What? What is this?
So slow to catch on.
Look at those monsters!
Relax, beautiful.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Typewriter Sessions. I'm Brett and as always I'm joined by James.
Good morning.
Oh, it's a very good morning, isn't it? Because we're here talking about Resident Evil. And firstly, Happy New Year to everyone. I know we're by the time this goes out there, we'll sort of the end of the first week of Feb or something like that by the time I get this out there. So we are a little bit late, but we hope you had an amazing Christmas and New Year, and we are very sorry it's a little bit late, but picking up after Christmas. I mean, I think our last episode was at the start of December, I think it went out.
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, obviously we concluded our two-parter of Resident Evil 2, and since then, it was Christmas, and then we got busy with family stuff and work, and it's just been quite hard, trying to get the script for this written together and all the research that goes into it. But we're here now and we're back, and crazily, we are in the month of Resident Evil Requiem.
Oh, it's exciting.
It really is.
It's a good time to be alive.
It is, and it's only fitting that we are, of course, talking about the destruction of Raccoon City.
We are indeed, yes. Very tidy little connection there.
It is. It's very fitting. And to think that, we're talking about the destruction when we'll be revisiting Raccoon City later this month. So, because obviously we are talking today about Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and how a side project became a main entry, how a stalking monster changed the series' heartbeat, the versions, the lost pieces, and the marks the game left on survival horror. So, what is Resident Evil 3? Well, released in Japan on the 22nd of September 1999, the 11th of November 1999 in the US, which is quite a gap for them, really. I always thought it would have been a smaller gap, but it's quite long. And as always, us here in the UK and the rest of Europe had to wait until the 18th of February 2000. That's a hell of a gap. So anyhow, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis marked the third mainline entry in Japanese video game developer Capcom's survival horror series. The game follows Jill Valentine's desperate escape from Raccoon City, events that occur almost concurrently with Resident Evil 2. The game kept the series' stable of 3D characters over pre-rendered backgrounds and fixed camera angles and the signature tank controls. But critically, it pushed the franchise towards a faster, more action-oriented approach and introduced a kind of recurring, persistent stalker enemy. The Nemesis.
The Nemesis. Stars.
You're very good at that. You're very good at that. You're a master of your craft, James.
Hey, if Capcom ever want to remake Resident Evil 3, give me a shout.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll have a easy and willing star for Nemesis in you.
I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would love them to have another crack at a remake as well.
Yeah. I know. I always it gets a lot of hate, but I think it's because it's probably feels so short. That's the thing. I actually really enjoyed it, but I think it's also because it feels extremely linear.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the remake, but I think having just very, very, as in yesterday, finished a playthrough of the original, you see why people are mad that certain areas got cut and certain concepts that existed in the original game sort of didn't make it across. But it's that it's completely fair and valid to compare a game that is a remake to the original one, but if you do take the remake on its own merits, I think it's a fun time.
I think so. Not. I really enjoyed playing it, and I think it's quite fun to sort of blast through on with your various unlimited ammos and things like that, just mowing through, just having a right good, literally just running through it, and I think aesthetically it looks fantastic. But I know I can certainly as we'll cover like how much was really put into this game. And then obviously I played it on my YouTube channel. You've recently just played it, so it's fresh in your mind.
Yeah.
You can sort of see why, there's probably a lot of missed opportunity with it.
Yeah.
So, but also, fun fact, the Japanese version of the game is called Biohazard, as they always are, Last Escape. And that's why the phrase Last Escape is used quite a few times in Joe's dialogue.
Yeah, I was going to say, in that the little sort of text crawl that you get every time you sort of restart or like load up a save or anything, you get that little...
Joe says Last Escape.
Yeah, this is my last escape.
Yeah. And that is why. It's because it's referencing the Japanese version of the title. So, but who were the brains behind Resident Evil 3 and how did this unique entry into the series come to be? Well, after the release and obvious critical and financial success of Resident Evil 2, Capcom was working on multiple Resident Evil projects, and one of those projects was being developed by Nextech. If this name sounds familiar, it's because this was the same developer who developed the Sega Saturn port of the original Resident Evil we discussed in our earlier episodes. This project was some way off and was being developed exclusively for the Dreamcast, Sega's next generation console. Another project in development was Resident Evil 0, which was to be a Nintendo 64 exclusive after the great success of the port of Resident Evil 2 on the console. But again, this didn't fix the problem of needing a PlayStation sequel. Hideki Kamiya, director of Resident Evil 2, also had some ideas for a true sequel for the PlayStation, but this was a long way off and wasn't in any real stage of development. And at this point, the only details we know of Kamiya's intended follow-up at this stage is that it would have taken place on a cruise ship, and players would have controlled Hunk, who was looking to acquire a sample of the G-Virus. Which I'm not really sure how that works, because the fourth Survivor extra play mode in Resident Evil 2 was to address the fact that Hunk survived.
Yeah.
And he had the G-Virus sample anyway. So why did he need another sample?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But presumably at some point someone brought that up internally and they're like, oh yeah.
There's clearly a reason why that never came to be a game. So, and that's for those who also may feel the whole setting of the cruise ship and everything sounds familiar, is because that story was used for Resident Evil Gaiden on the Game Boy Color, which isn't canon, by the way. It's not actually a canon story, that. Either way, this was eventually shelved when Sony announced the PlayStation 2 and Capcom realised Kamiya's game would not be completed in time before the console would release. Yoshiki Okamoto, the senior executive at Capcom, became concerned that there would be too long a gap without a major RE title on the PlayStation format and saw risking having no numbered sequel for PlayStation players especially. Kamiya's work was eventually pushed back and eventually would go on to see the light of day, and it would become the foundations of Resident Evil 4. But that's a very rich and deep story for another time. Okamoto then turned his attention to the various Resident Evil side projects which were going on. The Resident Evil 0 exclusive we just spoke about being one of them, but that was being exclusively made for the Nintendo, so that was scrapped. He also looked at the Sega Dreamcast exclusive, which, as we know, would go on to become Code Veronica. And because that was an exclusive to Sega, they couldn't use that. So he looked at other projects, and one of those, which was in development, was a project known as Biohazard 1.9/2.1, which was just an early placement title. And at this point, this game was only intended to be a smaller side project. So the projects also had another name, another pre-development name, which was Biohazard Gaiden. And as we know, that was used for the Game Boy Color game. But in Japanese, the word Gaiden does actually mean spin-off or side story, which is why that placement name was used for this project. So the 1.9/2.1 project had been born from an interest to expand on the story of Raccoon City during the events of Resident Evil 2. Production had begun in October 1998 with series veteran Shinji Mikami at the helm, and its name was to signify that the game would take place before, during, and after the events of Resident Evil 2, so 1.9/2.1.
Yeah.
To avoid the long wait for a new PlayStation Resident Evil title, Capcom and Okamoto decided to promote this team's work to the main numbering series, and it became known as Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Now, I just want to really sort of like quickly touch on this because I think there's like a bit of a misunderstanding about Code Veronica's place in the Resident Evil franchise.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people seem to believe that Code Veronica was actually intended to be Resident Evil 3 and that they changed their mind and just changed that. It's actually just not the case at all. And it's something I believed for a long time.
Yeah, that is a sort of regularly received assumption or sort of piece of information that certainly like that's what I understood was the case. But please enlighten me.
Yeah, well, this is it actually, because I mean, for a lot of years, I believed that like, oh well, Code Veronica was going to be the sequel, but because they got like impatient with how long that would take and they wanted another game out sooner, they made Resident Evil 3 as we know it today, and that was sort of like, and well, that's why it's kind of like Code Veronica's this sort of forgotten offshoot.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just really not the case. What it was that they turned their attention to the numerous Resident Evil projects that were going on at the time. So there was 3, the Resident Evil 0 project we just mentioned, Code Veronica, and then this 1.9/2.1. And that one, the final one we just mentioned, was the easiest and simplest one to promote into the mainline series because it was being developed for the PlayStation 1 and it had the quickest and easiest sort of turnaround for the PlayStation format, which was what they were... Although this bit of this isn't confirmed, but strongly hinted at, and this is what Shinji Mikami actually went on to believe as well, is that he believes there was some sort of internal politics between Capcom and PlayStation,
right,
that they wanted this sequel to be PlayStation.
Yeah.
You know, they wanted it, and that's why instead of... Because he actually believed that Code Veronica should have been the game that was the true successor, the true sequel. He said it actually fit more in line with the series, the series staples.
Yeah, and it moves the story forward a little more than Nemesis does as well. Because
I think Nemesis does really feel like a side story, because it's something else that's happening at the same time as Resident Evil 2. Whereas you say, Code Veronica is really moving the narrative along of the world and the lore of Resident Evil. So I think Shinji Mikami was right, but he believed that it was down to internal politics, and he felt like his game that he was working on was the one that got promoted to the sequel. He believed that shouldn't have been the case.
No, and you can understand it because, you know, Resident Evil as a franchise sort of, it was synonymous with PlayStation at that point.
Yes,
and you know, it makes sense from, you know, both sort of internally and externally that trilogy would play out across the same console generation on the same platform. So yeah, it does track. It's just
100%. And I can definitely see it from the perspective of Capcom and Sony, is to sort of like keep that momentum going, that a numbered game in the series should be released on the PlayStation first, because although we've said the series, although most people will probably believe that it is, the game was never a PlayStation exclusive title.
No.
It's just that they always came out on the PlayStation first.
Yeah.
So they became synonymous with the console.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can really blame them, thinking like, okay, well, we've built up this huge fan base and following of these games, and then we're going to shift people from playing a trilogy of games to actually needing to switch to a completely new console to carry on playing what would go on to be Code Veronica.
Yeah. And not even a new, like, oh, you're going to have to buy the next PlayStation. It's like, we want you to completely change the ecosystems. You need to move to...
You're going to need to move over to a Sega
platform. And then, and you know, and it's not even the last time they did that, because then they had, which I will get to, you know, in time, but then they sort of had that dubious Nintendo exclusivity.
Yeah, that's
with,
it. They did it with Resident Evil 4. Which is crazy as well, because Resident Evil 4 has become probably one of the greatest video games of all time.
Yeah.
And the fact that people sort of tend to forget that it was a Nintendo exclusive.
I think it's because Capcom forgot it was Nintendo exclusive because they pretty quickly released it on PS2 and then every other gaming platform known to man.
It didn't take long. I mean, I haven't got the dates to hand, but I seem to remember when I had got Resident Evil 4, it didn't feel like it was long before I was picking up my PlayStation copy of it. So yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And I think they've realised now that you either release them all at once on all platforms, or just stick to the PlayStation. Yeah. So, but anyway, development originally started with a modest team of around about 20 people, comprised of many of the team from Resident Evil 2. However, many of the original team had left after such a negative experience during the chaotic development of the previous game, which we of course covered during our last couple of episodes. The team, however, did swell during production as a result of the decision to turn this into a fully fledged sequel, with an estimated team of around about 40 to 50 people, so that's a similar sort of size team as to what they had for Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
Shinji Mikami served as the game's producer, while Katsuhiro Aoyama, maybe, directed, stepping in and taking over the Hideki Kamiya, who, as mentioned during the last episode, he was just totally exhausted, as well mentally and emotionally drained from his experience directing Resident Evil 2. But Kamiya did, however, stay on the team in a much smaller developmental role as a planner, so at least he stuck around.
Yeah, he's still got his finger in the pie somewhere.
He did. Finally, Masama Uda, I'm sorry if I'm destroying these names, returned and worked with Saori Maeda to compose the game's soundtrack. I am so sorry if I'm not pronouncing those right, but it's not my fault. Along with making the changes to the title and making this a now full-fledged sequel, Okamoto cut 2 months from the development schedule in order to get the game to market before the launch of the PlayStation 2. Capcom were also looking to capitalise on the success of Resident Evil 2 as soon as possible, striking while the iron was hot, so to speak. Along with this, however, Okamoto also rejected proposals that might have made the spin-off too experimental or indie, and insisted the game retain core gameplay recognisability so that fans of RE1 and RE2 would accept it. As a result, many of its experimental traits and gameplay styles were scrapped to inherit the playstyle and gameplay elements and expectations of a main series entry. Mikami reportedly saw this as executive meddling and felt that the game's scope was being arbitrarily constrained. After a tense back and forth between Mikami and Okamoto, Mikami, in his frustration, in fact quit Capcom. But this was overturned a few days later, and although I wasn't able to find any specific details on the negotiations which led to not just Mikami resigning, but his reinstatement, yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think that, this guy Mikami, the more I read about him, the more it does seem like he's a bit of a fucking renegade, you know what I mean? He's just he just sort of does what he wants, and he's just like, no, I'm not fucking happy about this. I mean, the sort of tense back and forth he had with Kamiya when he was directing Resident Evil 2 and Mikami was the producer, they ended up falling out, and he was just like, well, fucking do what you want then, and I'll review it every few months and see where you're up to. And in the end, he turned around and went, what the fuck is this shit? But it just seemed like he's just like, you know what, fuck off. This guy, honestly. So anyway, some issues of turning this game into a main sequel meant players would have yet another high expectation to either be met or succeeded, not just from a story perspective, but from a presentation perspective also. And this meant that Capcom had to walk a tightrope. The PlayStation hardware was aging, and RE2 had already pushed the console's limits in many respects, and RE3 would need to deliver improved spectacle without losing performance. RE3 uses largely the same engine, type/architecture as RE1 and RE2, using pre-rendered static 2D backgrounds over which 3D character models are rendered in real time. Of course, these were yet again used along fixed or semi-fixed camera angles. Using the now RE standard pre-rendered backgrounds, which we've discussed in depth over our previous episodes, They allowed far greater visual fidelity in environment detail, lighting, and texture richness, but hardware limitations on polygon count, the console's memory, and other limitations demanded trade-offs in order to push past the limitations they had reached during Resident Evil 2. The choice to have Resident Evil 3 mostly take place on the streets of Raccoon City made the game feel much larger in scale, and the pre-rendered backgrounds helped sell this illusion. Background images could be larger, but there was something they wanted to do different this time. For this project, they were looking to do what Kamiya had intended during the original production of Resident Evil 2, by switching the game style to be more action-oriented and therefore have more threats on the screen at any one time. Mm-hmm. And that is true, actually. I mean, like, you don't realise until you play it, and obviously you've just replayed it recently, is that it's weird how the game does feel bigger without really feeling bigger at the same time.
It's a very well-crafted illusion, because it is still fundamentally a series of corridors that you're just sort of funneled through.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just that sort of, because those corridors happen to be city streets rather than literal corridors inside a police station or inside a mansion. You do feel like you've got a bigger sort of playground.
Because like those backgrounds sort of show city streets off in the background and everything, you feel like you're part of something bigger, but as you say, you are still essentially walking through an alley or a corridor.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Raccoon City is literally a city of back streets and alleyways, really.
Yeah.
But because of like doing car wrecks and fires and things like that, you kind of think to yourself, oh, well, I'm forced to do this, but really this area is so much bigger. But from a perspective of what they've literally just made you an alley to walk through. Yeah. You know, and that's all it was. But it was a great sort of smoke and mirrors illusion, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they did a really good job of that. And I think by creating more enemies this time around in this game, that kind of made it feel bigger as well, because it's like, oh my god, I'm in this big city and there's fucking tons of people everywhere.
They really went wild with the sort of zombie counts in certain parts of it.
Oh yeah. You could definitely. It's great because I think Kamiya's thinking was sort of ahead of his time in some elements. I mean, some of Kamiya's ideas, all the way back from when he was a part of Resident Evil 1, they started coming into fruition in future Resident Evil titles, and it's still doing it like now. You know, like it's crazy how many ideas he had that, well, you know, which is the case with many ideas in a lot of Resident Evil, they'd end up coming to fruition somewhere. But Kamiya, you know, especially, we'll talk about it in future episode, but his idea for like character swapping, you know, he had that idea, and eventually it comes into play in Resident Evil 0.
Yeah.
And all these crazy ideas that he had, which people at the time were just like, well, it's either a shit idea or we can't do it. So he had this future sight of like what could be a great gameplay element in a Resident Evil game, but they just couldn't bring it into fruition at the time.
Yeah.
And this idea of having loads of zombies in the game at the time, well, they couldn't do it for Resident Evil 2, but they found ways of being able to do it for Resident Evil 3. And in the scope of Resident Evil 3, it actually really works.
Mm-hmm.
RE3 introduced more frequent enemy encounters in outdoor, street-based environments. Zombies in larger numbers, dogs, crows, more ambient threats, making the pace feel more relentless. You also had the constant threat of being pursued and shorter moments of respite. Nemesis embodies that feeling, but we'll come to that very, very shortly. If you listen to our episodes covering Resident Evil 2, we know that the development when working on Resident Evil 1.5, the original build for Resident Evil 2, they used lower polygon builds of character models to allow for more enemies to be on the screen at any one time. The only problem back then was that character models looked really poor as a result, and this was a contributing factor as to why the game's production shut down and was restarted. However, this time the developers were pretty familiar with the development tools of the PlayStation and had learnt new ways to be more creative with the player models, which, although in RE3 they were technically inferior, they were still able to make them look comparatively as good as Resident Evil 2. I mean, if you see some side-by-side videos, it's actually quite... You don't really realise when you're playing the game generally. You kind of see it, that there is some slight differences in the way the zombie characters look. But it's only when you put them side by side that you realise just... I'm not going to say shit, but just how poor they look in comparison to Resident Evil 2, like the zombies and the character models. But they still are able to make them... They've tweaked them in such a way where it's like, well, we can make them look good. They don't look as good, but they still look really good.
Yeah, they're not distractingly simplified. It's a decent enough facsimile of what you saw in 2. And I think also just because in the moment, because you are now being mobbed by these like massive hordes of zombies rather than just like 3 or 4 at maximum, you're not looking at the screen thinking, oh, the texture on that zombie, or you're thinking,
they're looking a bit more blocky, aren't they? Oh, now I'm fucking dead.
Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, and I think when you sort of sit most models side by side and you really scrutinise it, then you can see that RE3 models aren't as good, and they are a bit more boxy, and they aren't as smooth on the edges, but they have done an amazing job of the models still having a level of detail to them, which helps bring each character to life. And I think they've sort of like, they must have had this idea of like, well, we'll make them look really chewed up and messed up, so it doesn't... They look like they're supposed to look like that. And I think that they were quite clever with that. Again, it's more of that smoke and mirrors type thing. Due to the increase in scale, one important factor was to keep the game running smoothly. The frame rate of RE3 did at one point pose a problem, and Mikami discussed issues and concerns during an interview with GameFan. For example, Mikami noted that collision detection, especially in the case with enemies and other multiple moving objects, posed serious difficulty. Ensuring the game could run smoothly, even with Nemesis pursuing, enemy spawns, character animations, it required limiting the number of active zombies or enemies in the scene. But once again, through creative tricks they had learned during development of the previous entries, they were still able to increase it over previous entries. So, as we previously also discussed, the team intentionally made the game more action-forward. More enemies in a wider outdoor city streets and quicker pacing. But one thing which makes this entry into the series different to its predecessors is the game only having one protagonist. This decision was made when Okamoto had enforced the once spin-off title to now become a sequel. The original plan was to have a new cast of characters once again, but this changed when those involved felt it was important to bring back a character from the previous games. The decision was made to bring back Jill, as she seemed the most obvious person to return, although it had originally been planned and intended she'd be the playable character in Code Veronica. This became a simple matter to fix, as Chris had already been set up to head to Europe and Claire would go looking for him, ultimately making the pair the protagonists of that game instead. And it does just feel right, doesn't it? I mean, unless the story would have been different for Code Veronica originally, I think the fact that Claire is in Europe looking for her brother, and we already knew Chris was in Europe hunting Umbrella because of his diary we found in Resident Evil 2, it seems like the most plausible sequel story.
It does, yeah. Because that is, that was Claire's sort of plot motivation in 2 anyway, wasn't it? That she was in Raccoon City looking for Chris, so it would make sense that her story would continue along that path.
And she's looking for her brother. She was looking for her brother then, and she's looking for her brother now, so to speak. So yeah, you're right, exactly. But with only one protagonist, the team got to work on how to create new ways to play and make it feel as though you still had more reasons to play the game once you'd completed it. This came in the way of a new live selection choice that altered moments in the run and, controversially, branching encounters. For those that haven't played RE3, this meant that at certain points of the game, the player would have to make a decision while facing a time limit on what to do when faced with a particular scenario. The result would change the course of the game temporarily, and although all paths lead to the same destination, each path did reward you with different enemy encounters and different items to find. The decision behind this was to make a different kind of scare, not just the mansion's creeping dread or the desperation to escape the RPD station, but an atmosphere of being hunted and the fear of not knowing whether the decision you needed to make will be the right one. And I fucking hate moments like that in games. I'm always just like, what if I do something and it's not the right thing to do?
Oh, mate, yeah.
I hate it. And I'm not even going to lie, sometimes if I'm really invested in a game and I want to really make sure I'm getting the most and the best out of the game, sometimes I will pause it and find out if I'm doing the right thing or not.
Yeah.
Because I'd be lying if I said that I played every game perfectly I can't because I don't. But the fact is, when I'm faced with those moments, I'm just like, I don't want to fuck this up.
Oh man, you must be a wreck playing like supermassive games.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. You know, like games like Mass Effect and things like that. You know, there was nothing worse than being presented with because I mean, I'm going to go off a little bit now, but Mass Effect, I think, are some of the fucking greatest games because that trilogy of games, that story is yours from the very moment you boot the first one up to the end of the very third one. Yeah. That is your journey. I've never known a game series where you have 3 individual games, but it carries your story on from the very moment you begin the first and it ends the very second the third ends. That is your journey. And I hated being posed with a choice which would ultimately shape the universe, you know, and I was just like, oh my god, what am I going to do? So yeah, I'm a nightmare with these really, really big games, but obviously they're just so much fun, aren't they? It's fucking fantastic. And I think Resident Evil 3 was a great way of doing that. Like, just that thing of like, oh my god, I'm on a time limit and I've got to choose what I've got to do. What am I going to do? And then you never really knew if you'd made the right decision until maybe somewhere a bit later down the road or whatever. Yeah. As any Resident Evil player will also be aware, that decisions always have an impact on the ending you get. And this was no different in Resident Evil 3, but we're going to cover all of that in due course. But with all of these changes in development, one thing we haven't touched on is the introduction of a terrifying new enemy. If you've listened to our previous episodes, we always discuss the enemies in their own section, but this new enemy introduced in RE3 is more than just a new adversary. If Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 was an imposing presence, the Nemesis was designed to be relentless, a programmed hunter whose single mission is to terminate the surviving STARS members. The team explicitly designed Nemesis to create paranoia, the feeling of being stalked, and modelled parts of the concept on cinematic stalkers like Terminator 2's T-1000. During an interview in an issue of official UK PlayStation magazine, Shinji Mikami put it plainly, quote, "I wanted to introduce a new kind of fear into the game, a persistent feeling of paranoia. The Nemesis brings that on in spades. When it disappears after the first confrontation, you live in dread of the next attack," end quote. And I think he's right, isn't he? I think that is so accurate. I mean, I remember playing it for the first time and thinking, like, as soon as I got into the next area, I'd be safe, but that just wasn't always the case, was it? No,
it's your experience in those first 2 games is very much like if you're being chased by something, or if you're, you know, in a sticky situation, you just head for the door.
Yep.
And then you might not be safe, but you're safe from that thing.
Yes. Well, so, I think that your thought and your feeling is always, if I've fucked up or I'm in danger, leave the room and go back in.
Yeah, exactly.
You've been programmed that way from the previous games, haven't you?
Regroup. You can always get out of you know, whatever sticky situation you're in. Yeah.
Exactly. And you've been programmed that way, haven't you? You know, like, and you sort of think to yourself, oh well, this thing's big and I'm in danger. I'm just going to walk out and it'll be fine. I mean, even in boss fights, like in Resident Evil 1, for example, like the snake, you actually have the choice to fight Yawn. Yeah. You know, like you can either get in and grab what you need and leave, or you can go in, grab what you need and get bitten, and then that affects the story, or you can stand and fight it. You know, but you have a choice. But that changes with Nemesis, because for the first time you can walk out the room and that enemy follows you. Yeah,
and every time that happens, it is even you know, in the cold light of 2026, when this game's sort of a quarter of a century old, and you know exactly what Nemesis is, it's still absolutely like heart pounding when when he's like relentlessly pursuing you around, especially in that sort of in the RPD section.
Yeah,
and it doesn't matter where you go, and apart from you know, your safe room, anywhere else is completely like he can track you down.
But you can even, the fact that he even waits in those areas outside of safe areas, and because the game is designed to be so small and windy and narrow, and he's such a big motherfucker.
Yeah.
You can't even dodge him, can you? Really? You're like you. I mean, you can if you've mastered that dodge mechanic, which I'm fairly certain is not a mechanic you can master.
No,
because it's a piece of shit.
So haphazard.
Yeah, it's you can maybe do it 50% of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I think for the vast majority of the time you're doing it out of luck, I think. But anyway, that's probably me just compensating for my lack of ability of being able to do it.
It's definitely my experience.
Yeah. So but yeah, I mean, you just can't dodge him, and you think to yourself, "Oh well, I'll run through here, and I'm good." Oh no, he's still coming. Right, I've got to keep going. But you go into the next area. Nope, he's still coming, and you just sort of think, to yourself, when is this guy gonna stop following me? And then you think, "Oh well, he's stopped following me." You go back into that previous area, and he's still there. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake, it's a nightmare. But yeah, it was a really good sort of like introduction, wasn't it? Of this new enemy type that was simply relentless. But the Nemesis appears at scripted and semi-dynamic points. So unlike Mr. X in Resident Evil 2, the Nemesis can pursue the player across areas and also has the ability to use weapons, his weapon of choice being a rocket launcher. The Nemesis can even dodge attacks, really helping to solidify that feeling of being unstoppable. And those repeated encounters and the possibility of Nemesis breaking through backgrounds or returning at any point after being seemingly defeated produce a new constant tension in the city. I would like to mention, we discussed like poor Hideki Kamiya, the director of Resident Evil 2, and how he had wanted many of these features. We've already sort of touched on it, but I think he kind of wanted, this was another thing that he wanted to introduce was, he already saw Terminator 2 and these more action-oriented film sequels in big franchises like Aliens, Terminator 2, and other like action-based sequels. He wanted that for Resident Evil 2.
Yeah.
And he wanted like enemies that were more persistent and things like that. And again, we already spoke about it just a few moments ago, but this is another one of his ideas that he wanted this, and then it's come to be again. It's just clearly ahead of his time when I think he was thinking of things that just weren't possible right there and then. But
yeah, and that's a
true artist.
It is, and that's a good game developer. If you're only ever playing safely within the confines of your sandbox, you're literally not pushing boundaries, are you? It's only by sort of envisioning what's beyond the wall that you ever get beyond the wall. So
very true. Yeah, because you if you come up with an idea and you're like, that is such a good idea, but we can't do it, you get to this point where you're like, well, we need to figure out how we do it.
Yeah,
because that's such a fucking good idea. We need to do it.
Yeah, and sometimes you find clever ways around it and you make it happen, or sometimes you wait a console generation or two until technology's caught up with your ambition. And it's like you said right at the start, how there are ideas that germinated right back during the creation of the very first Resident Evil game that might not have appeared until 6 or 7 games later, but they didn't let ideas go to waste, and that's.
I think that's it. I think the fact that they didn't just leave it on the cutting room floor, the fact that they picked all these bits up off the floor and they sort of put them away, and they were like, well, maybe we'll use them somewhere down the road because that was a really good idea. We just can't do it. I think the fact that they did do that was really cool, because I mean, even the sort of we talked about it in our Resident Evil 2 episodes, but the fact that you had those moments where one playthrough affected the other person's playthrough, that was an idea Kamiya came up with in the first Resident Evil, but they couldn't do it. But it saw the light of day in 2, and it's a good job it did, because it made it one of its defining sort of features in the game.
Yeah,
like the choices you were making in one playthrough would affect the others. It's just really, really cool that like Kamiya could just think of these ideas which just couldn't just do them yet, but they were key moments in other Resident Evil titles. So Capcom heavily showcased the Resident Evil 3 pre-release. The game was demoed at the Tokyo Game Show in March 1999 and had a playable build at E3 in 1999. Oh, E3, RIP, by the way. I mean, the fact that people don't talk about the fact that E3 is no longer a thing upsets me. I mean,
it's not the same, is it? Just having, get a nice like video presentation that drops in the middle of June now, but it's not the same as the big spectacle.
That's it. I mean, you get Nintendo doing their like showcases every so often, and that's always cool to see and everything. But the fact that you had these big video game conventions where loads of nerds and virgins could get together and geek out together was so fucking cool. And that was always my dream to have got to E3.
I know.
That was me and Charlotte spoke about it before. Like when it got canned, we were talking about it, and we were just like, that was always like one of our dreams was to get to E3.
I know.
And the fact that it's gone, I just think it's such a shame because that's it now though. We're going to go off on a tangent ranting about E3 now. But like, I think the fact that we've just made it this thing of like, oh, well, you can just sit at home and watch a video. No, we're a community of gamers that we love and we want to be with the people who do this for us. It's like a Comic Con. Can you imagine if they just did all the Comic Cons online instead?
I know, and there are still, there's still like Gamescom and stuff, but E3 was like the Super Bowl. Yeah, that's it. It'd be like if you sort of cancelled the Oscars, but it's all right because we've still got the Smash Hits Awards. That's a bad comparison because that's music, but you know what I mean.
But it's so small time, in the grand scheme of things. Like Smash Hits versus the Academy Awards. It's like nowhere close, is it? And if anything, it's actually the perfect comparison because it doesn't make up for that loss.
No,
it's like E3 was WrestleMania. It was the Super Bowl. It was like the World Cup. It was all of these things for the gaming industry. And it's not to take away anything from Gamescom, as you said, but like for me, E3 was the Mac Daddy, wasn't it?
There are so many legendary sort of E3 moments over the years, and some legendarily like bad as well.
Yeah, of course.
But that's that they also add to the sort of legend of it, and I think it's probably why the Game Awards get such a big push now at the end of every year, because that's really the only mainstream showcase now for game developers to do these sort of big elaborate announcements. I mean, I'm personally biased, but like watching TGA's this past December and that big elaborate thing they did to announce Control Resonant. It's like that was the E3's bread and butter. That's where that used to happen, and you had like a full week of that happening. Like every day there was like something like that, and now it's just. Well,
I'm sorry, but Resident Evil Requiem. Seeing as we're talking about Resident Evil, although that did get like a big thing, and they did the sort of RPD arch, didn't they? And they had some actors / models, dressed up as Grace and all the rest of it. But like, can you imagine how much more we would have had if that had appeared at E3?
Yeah, the scale would have just been just that much bigger.
People would have just been playing it. There would have been giveaways. It would have been huge. It would have been huge. I mean, if you think about how much they put into it back then, when games were a lot more niche, how much Capcom invested in pre-demo, all that kind of stuff. Think about it, like what it would be now. It's huge. Honestly, it still blows my mind that E3 is no longer a thing when games are as big as what they are.
Yeah.
And I think it's down to the developers being greedy and lazy that they'd rather just pump out a little, production-made video than actually physically attending something to give back to the people, give back to the players that make the games the success that they are. I find it actually a little bit offensive, to the players, to the community. But anyway, that's my rant about fucking E3 done with. So, Biohazard Last Escape made one of its earliest public appearances at the Tokyo Game Show in March of 1999. Unfortunately for both journalists and fans, Capcom didn't bring a playable demo to the event. Instead, attendees were limited to watching a video presentation which offered only a glimpse of what was coming. It wasn't until April that Capcom finally confirmed some key plot details. They revealed that the story would involve what they called an unlikely hero, a character who was later confirmed to be Carlos Oliveira, and that the game's timeline would unfold both the day before and the day after the events of Resident Evil 2. Around this time, Capcom also clarified that the game was being developed specifically for the PlayStation. A playable build of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was publicly shown at E3 1999, giving fans their first real look at the game, but this early version was far from complete. For example, the now famous dodging mechanic hadn't even been finished yet, so it was completely missing from the demo. There were also a number of noticeable differences in this early build compared to the final game. To begin with, the opening sequence was entirely different. Instead of the cinematic we know today, the game originally opened with a slideshow featuring several key stars members, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Chris Redfield, Rebecca Chambers and Brad Vickers. The images showed the team arriving at the heliport of the Raccoon police station immediately after the events of the mansion incident, and in one of these early images, Jill is seen arguing with Chief Irons while the rest of the Stars team stands beside her. And she's sort of basically just like leaning over this desk, like fucking chowing at Irons, who's sitting there not really giving a fuck. Another image shows Jill wearing a white coat over casual clothing. The sequel would then transition from a normal, peaceful Raccoon City into a devastated version we see in the final game. There was also a puzzle in the downtown area that never made it into the release version. In this early build, players would place a length of chain where the fire hose normally goes in order to access the hose. Without doing this, the nearby ladder would remain folded up and unusable, and this area was also laid out slightly different. In the early version, there was no crate blocking the front of the kendo van, and its rear door was open with the downtown map placed inside. And in the final game, a crate blocks the van, and the door is closed, and the map is instead tacked onto the wall up the staircase. Later that summer, in July, Capcom experienced overwhelming success with the Japanese release of Dino Crisis, which I was never a fan of, if I'm honest. Dinosaurs just don't really do it for me. I've just never really been a thing about dinosaurs. It sold so quickly that they had to manufacture additional copies, and anticipating equally strong sales in the United States, Capcom decided to include a brief demo of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis with the Western release of Dino Crisis. Around late June, roughly 3 months before the game's launch, the title was officially changed to Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and project supervisor Yoshiki Okamoto later explained that this decision was made to maintain consistency across the numbering of the series, like first 3 PlayStation titles. So, interesting fact, by November, Capcom confirmed that the North American versions of Nemesis was actually shipping earlier than expected. Copies were set to appear on store shelves as early as November the 10th or 11th. And at the same time, journalists at IGN had already managed to secure an early copy, which they tested using a modified or quote-unquote chipped PlayStation, which they faced significant backlash and scrutiny over. Do you remember chipping your PlayStation?
I do. I never did it myself. I never had a hardware chip, but I messed around with an Action Replay cartridge and a biro insert holding the disc cover open.
Nice, yeah. I always remember when I did get my PlayStation chipped, but I must admit, like, because I was a collector of main games that I loved anyway, I didn't really get many chipped games. No. Because the games that I wanted to play, I wanted to own, and I've always been like that. So, like, I got it chipped, and then it was kind of like this thing where it was kind of pointless to me.
I'd never had many. I regret my PlayStation 1 days significantly because I didn't have much value in collecting then. Like, I got a lot of, legit games, but I would very much be sort of like play it, trade it. And I think about when I think about some of the games that I used to have sat on my shelf now that would be worth like 3 figures.
Yeah,
so it just makes me weep.
But you see, like, we didn't know then though. I mean, like, I never kept them because, well, I still don't. I don't keep them for value as collector's items to sell for a value. I collect them because I'm a lover of the series and I want to have a collection of these things that I love, as you can see by the room that we're in. Yes. But I must admit there are games that I have traded in, but that was the thing of the time, because if you wanted the next game, and back when trading games was a thing, that's sort of like, well, I can get the next game if I trade this in towards it, and I don't have to find 40 quid.
Yeah.
You know, so it was easier, wasn't it? So yeah, it just made sense. So one thing we haven't discussed yet is the story, and we'll talk about the story itself soon, but let's talk about how the story for this project was developed. So Noboru Sugimura, Resident Evil 2's writer, had become the lead of Capcom's new in-house team of writers, Team Flagship, since the release and the success of that game. And as such, he and the others in his team were very much in demand after writing the story for Resident Evil 2. Both Sugimura and the others in his team were committed to other video game projects, including the writing of Code Veronica and Resident Evil 0. With this being the case, Yasuhisa... Oh god, man, this is a name. Yasuhisa? Yeah, let's go with that. Yasuhisa Kawamura was assigned to write the story for Resident Evil 3. So Kawamura had only recently joined Capcom, and aside from touching upon the Dino Crisis script, his main writing credit came from the novelization of Battle Angel Alita, which is no small credit, by the way. Despite being relatively new, he was given the task of shaping the stories based on Mikami's initial pitch, a scenario closely connected to Resident Evil 2. So when you think that this wasn't even written by Sugimura, I think that the story is pretty good for Resident Evil 3, to be fair.
Again, it sort of works very nicely as a companion piece to 2.
I agree.
Yeah.
As previously discussed, when development on this game first began, the goal wasn't to create an entirely new chapter in the Resident Evil universe. Instead, the team envisioned it as a standalone expansion to Resident Evil 2, something that would deepen the story rather than shift to a new setting. So as you say, like a companion. Early on, Shinji Mikami and Katsuhiro Aoyama even experimented with the idea of introducing a brand new cast of characters, but eventually they decided the story would be stronger, anchored to someone familiar. And as previously mentioned, Jill Valentine was chosen to be the protagonist. Kawamura built his narrative around Umbrella's internal power structure and its complicated relationship with Dr. William Birkin. He also introduced a new layer to the lore, a rivalry between Umbrella's American and European divisions. To expand the world further, Kawamura pulled heavily from ideas found in Flagship's drama albums, which were a series of radio dramas produced and broadcasted in Japan, which expanded on the Resident Evil lore and universe in Resident Evil 1 and 2. From the radio show Doomed Raccoon City Volume 2, he incorporated the Raccoon General Hospital, imagining it as a facility desperately trying to develop a T-virus vaccine as the outbreak consumed the city. Volume 1 of the same radio show provided the concept of the virus spreading through the contaminated drinking water, and Volume 3, he borrowed the eerie image of infected victims being mistakenly buried, only to claw their way out of their graves in the cemetery. So it's really cool, this. I mean, like, it was only in the research that I learned of this. So there was these like radio shows, and they all had these really sort of like little cool ideas to pack out some of the story of 1 and 2, and to sort of essentially make them canon, I suppose. Yeah. These were then borrowed to pack into Resident Evil 3. And I think that's fucking cool, man. So, when Jill became the confirmed protagonist, Kawamura introduced what would become one of the series' most iconic elements, the Nemesis T-type, created with the express purpose of hunting her down. It was also around this time that he made another major decision. Rather than having Jill escape Raccoon City before its downfall, he wanted players to witness the city's destruction firsthand. Flagship's radio drama albums had previously depicted Raccoon City being destroyed by napalm, specifically in the show The Little Runaway Sherry. But Kawamura envisioned something even more dramatic. Drawing partial inspiration from Neon Genesis Evangelion, he imagined a top-secret, extremely powerful thermobaric weapon being used to level the city. In his version, the blast would wipe Raccoon City from the map and essentially kill everybody within, giving the game a far more catastrophic and emotionally charged conclusion. Of course, not every idea survived development. Some concepts were cut during early drafts, while others didn't make it past Okamoto's expansion phase. Among the abandoned material were additional subplots including stranded UBCS mercenaries, Another scrapped idea, and one of the most controversial, was an opening nightmare sequence in which Jill would hallucinate shooting herself in the head. Ioma rejected the idea outright, saying he found it deeply unsettling. I'm sure he didn't really say it like that either. I bet he turned around and went, "Bro, this is fucked up. You're not you're not doing that." So, even though Flagship remained responsible for maintaining the continuity of the Resident Evil timeline, and Kawamura submitted scripts and storyboards regularly to keep everything aligned, the collaboration was smooth. So Flagship didn't request any major rewrites, even after Kawamura introduced the dramatic thermobaric destruction of Raccoon City. The two teams worked together without conflict, and the story moved forward with Kawamura's vision intact, which is pretty fucking cool. I mean, hats off to this dude that he just sort of like... You've got like a complete writing department for Capcom. They're in charge of writing Resident Evil. This guy just comes along, they're all too fucking busy, and he goes, "Well, I'll write a story for you." Writes it, and they're like, "That's pretty fucking good, well done."
Nice one, mate.
Yeah, nice one. Yeah, you crack on. I think that's fucking awesome. I mean, hats off to that dude. So, before we move on to the story, let's cover the cast of characters within the game. So, although not as diverse as Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 did introduce some key characters and events into lore which would stick with the franchise for a long time to come. So, firstly, we have the game's protagonist, Jill Valentine, former member of STARS, the elite special tactics and unit of the Raccoon City Police Department. After uncovering Umbrella's bioweapons program during the mansion incident, Jill becomes one of the company's top targets. In Resident Evil 3, she's trying to escape a collapsing Raccoon City while suffering from exhaustion, trauma, and eventually a T-virus infection. Despite this, Jill's resourcefulness, combat training, and unshakable determination give this game's narrative. She's the survivor who simply refuses to die. Like Bruce Willis in Die Hard. So, we also have Carlos Oliveira. He's a corporal in the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, or the UBCS, a private military unit created by Umbrella to clean up outbreaks they themselves caused. Unlike many in the company's employ, Carlos genuinely wants to help survivors. He's skilled in combat, loyal to his teammates, and grows increasingly disillusioned with Umbrella as he sees the devastation firsthand. In Resident Evil 3, Carlos becomes a crucial ally to Jill, rescuing her at key moments and fighting to keep her alive after she's infected. Next we have Nikolai Zin... I can never say this guy's last name. What is that last name? Nikolai...
Zinoviev?
That'll do. I'm sure I've heard him say it multiple times while playing the game, but I can't remember it. But that might be right. Nikolai Zinoviev. You said it better than I did. Nikolai is another UBCS operative, but unlike Carlos, he's actually secretly working as a monitor/supervisor. Umbrella's internal spy is responsible for collecting combat data on Bao's. He's calculative, manipulative, and ruthlessly self-interested. Nikolai uses the chaos of Raccoon City to his advantage. Throughout the game, he sabotages rescue efforts and eliminates fellow mercenaries to protect Umbrella's secrets and secure his own payout. He's the embodiment of corporate survival instinct taken to the extreme. Although, I just always felt he was another version of Wesker, personally.
Yeah, that's fair.
I just thought he was a bit of a pound shop Wesker. Mikhail Victor. Mikhail Victor is the commanding officer of Carlos's unit within the UBCS. Despite being severely wounded when introduced, he remains steadfast and focused on protecting civilians and his men. Mikhail is a seasoned leader, a veteran soldier with a strong moral core, and his courage plays a pivotal role in slowing down the Nemesis and giving Jill and Carlos a fighting chance, making him one of the story's most tragic and heroic figures. R.I.P.
R.I.P.
We also have Brad Vickers, another former STARS member and helicopter pilot during the mansion incident. He appears at the start of the game as one of the few who understands just how dangerous the situation is. Scarred by his past encounter with Umbrella's bows, Brad is frightened but attempts to warn Jill about the Nemesis. His fate reinforces the threat level of the creature and serves as a narrative catalyst for Jill's ensuing nightmare. We also have great comedy character Dario Rosso. Dario is one of the many desperate civilians caught in the chaos of Raccoon City's downfall. Jill Valentine first meets him in the warehouse near the game's opening moments, where he has barricaded himself inside a large storage container. Traumatized and emotionally shattered after losing his daughter, Lucia, to the outbreak. Dario refuses Jill's attempts to evacuate him, insisting that hiding away is safer than facing the horrors outside. His fear ultimately becomes his downfall when Jill later returns to the warehouse. She discovers signs of a failed escape attempt, and despite his earlier claims that he would rather starve than confront the undead, Dario appears to have tried fleeing only to meet a tragic and ironic end, killed and devoured by zombies just outside his hiding place. Dario stands as one of the many haunting reminders of the human cost of Raccoon City's collapse, a man consumed not only by the undead, but by grief and hopelessness long before they reached him. Fun fact, when you first enter the Uptown Street area at the start of the game, you hear a scream and catch a glimpse of a female in pink running from the area away from some zombies. So it is impossible to save this person, and you eventually catch up to them and you find they've met an unfortunate end, lying in a pool of blood, most likely the result of a zombie attack, and it's safe to say that this is actually Dario's daughter.
Good.
Yeah, so you go through the door and you hear, like, I think as you reach the streets, you hear this scream, and if you're able to sort of like navigate through the zombies, you can try and catch up to her, but eventually you do find her.
You never actually can.
You can never save her.
I obviously wasn't fast enough because I don't remember seeing her. So.
No, I certainly wasn't fast enough. I know that much. So finally, although an enemy, and we discussed his development earlier, we certainly need to discuss the Nemesis, so Umbrella's most advanced bioweapon deployed during the Raccoon City outbreak. Engineered for intelligence, endurance, and near unbreakable resilience, Nemesis features a parasitic organism that enhances its host body and allows for limited problem solving and weapon use. Its mission in RE3 is chillingly simple: eliminate surviving STARS members to erase witnesses to Umbrella's crimes. Unlike typical monsters, Nemesis is relentless and adaptive, capable of using rocket launchers, learning from failed strategies, and mutating mid-combat. Its repeated pursuit of Jill transforms the game into a constant battle between Predator and Survivor, defining the tone and pacing of the entire story. So, Mr. X from RE2 and Nemesis RE3 are cousins in concept. Both are Tyrant-class bows designed to stalk players, but Nemesis had amplified features, improved mobility, weapon use, and the ability to take commands on the fly. So, obviously a bit of an evolution.
Yeah.
So...
What a dickhead.
Yeah, he was a dick, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was a real dick. So... The 1999 PlayStation release featured English voice acting, and just as Resident Evil 2 had, RE3 had managed to pull in a range of experienced voice actors for the cast of characters. So let's start with the star of the show, Jill Valentine, voiced by Catherine Disher. Disher's performance gave Jill a grounded, no-nonsense confidence that really anchored the entire story. Voice also carried some real authority to it, and I think it's telling that she voiced Jean Grey in the X-Men animated series. So, beyond Resident Evil and X-Men, though, she's had a long career across animation and TV, and her voice in RE3 brings just the right mix of determination and vulnerability. And although she does some really very regular, quite strangely orgasmic sounds, she does it way too often. It's a little bit weird. So, next is Carlos Oliveira, Jill's UBCS ally. He was voiced by Vince Corazza. Corazza came into the game with a background in television and film, stretching back to childhood, and he later appeared in shows like NYPD Blue and his voice work in Sailor Moon. His take on Carlos gives the character that perfect blend of soldier tough and unexpectedly warm-hearted, exactly what the story needed from its secondary lead. There's then Mikhail Victor, the wounded but resilient squad leader. He was voiced by William Hope, who many people recognise as Lieutenant Gorman from Aliens.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So Hope's voice brings a weary, heroic gravitas to Mikhail, making his sacrifices and decisions feel genuinely impactful. On the opposite end of the moral spectrum, we have Nikolai. He was voiced by Roger Honeywell, and while Honeywell's broader screen credits are limited, his performance as Nikolai is memorable for its cold calculation. The way he delivers his lines makes Nikolai's self-preserving, sort of quietly sinister nature come through loud and clear. A character with a very different energy is Brad Vickers, who was voiced by Darren O'Hare. O'Hare later became known to gamers for his role as Commander Thomas Lasky in Halo 4 and Halo 5. Yeah, so he voiced Lasky. Yeah, that was fucking awesome. I couldn't believe that. And he even portrayed Lasky in the live-action miniseries Forward Unto Dawn. Also cool. In RE3, his tense, nervous delivery really sells Brad's constant fear, and let's be honest, the poor guy has good reason to be terrified. So, the unintentionally funny character, Dario Rosso, was voiced by 80s Saturday Night Live star Tony Rosetta.
Oh.
And Tony had a number of credits in both voice acting and live action roles, and he actually played the voice of Luigi in the original Super Mario World cartoon back in the early 90s.
Brilliant.
Perhaps the most interesting credit, however, is that he supposedly voiced another character in the game, the Nemesis.
What?
Yeah, so Tony Rosetta's guttural growls and terrifying roars have become iconic in survival horror history, and he didn't need monologues or speeches, just that relentless, monstrous presence, punctuated by the occasional stars to send a chill down your spine. If it's true, it's an incredible credit, but sadly, Rosetta died back in 2017 after a heart attack, and he was only 63.
Oh, very sad.
Yeah, so R.I.P. Tony, and thank you for your service. We hope you're out there amongst the stars. Can't resist, sorry. So, yeah, in terms of cutscenes for the game, there's not really much to talk about. The game blended pre-rendered cinematic sequences with in-game scenes, so some ports adjusted or compressed the FMVs, depending on media limits. So CD compression on PlayStation versus high fidelity for like the Dreamcast and the PC. But if you want to know how these are sort of like done, just check out our Resident Evil 2 episodes, because they pretty much use the same method, really. So we're now going to cover the story and like its full ins and outs. So there's a bit to cover here, so strap yourself in. But we're also going to cover the numerous pathways and the differences that they have. So there's it's going to be pretty comprehensive. So get ready. When it was all said and done, Kawamura gave us a story which runs prior, parallel, and after RE2, beginning on September the 28th, 1998, 24 hours prior to the events of Resident Evil 2. So, Special Tactics and Rescue Service stars member Jill Valentine, after failing to warn Raccoon City of Umbrella's activity, makes a bid to escape from Raccoon City. As witnessed in Resident Evil 2, the majority of the population had been turned into zombies by the T-virus leaked by William Birkin. After fighting through hordes of zombies, Jill runs into fellow STARS survivor Brad Vickers, who we all know to be the cowardly pilot from the first Resident Evil game. Brad, clearly shaken, tells Jill that something is chasing him, something intent on eliminating the remaining STARS members. Jill eventually reaches the Raccoon City Police Department and once again encounters Brad, who is immediately killed with the arrival of a new bow enemy, the Nemesis. Umbrella's creation is a bioorganic weapon programmed with a single order: kill the surviving STARS members. The reasons are obvious. It is these 5 survivors of the mansion incident who had first-hand experience and knowledge of Umbrella's machinations. Jill eventually retreats into the police station and encounters the Nemesis on numerous occasions, who pursues her relentlessly through the station. Eventually making it back onto the streets of Raccoon City, Jill finds Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service member Carlos Oliveira. His team were dispatched to help with the outbreak and escort survivors out of Raccoon City. Jill doesn't believe or trust Carlos, knowing Umbrella to be the real villains and the cause of the outbreak, and although he may not know it, his team are never going to complete their mission. Carlos, regardless of Jill's belief, invites her to join him along with his teammates as they attempt to retreat and escape the city. After meeting up with Carlos at a railway carriage, he finds wounded Mikhail and his commander Nikolai. Nikolai, angry at Carlos for bringing a civilian, explains to Jill that a rescue helicopter can be contacted if they manage to reach the city's clock tower and ring the bell, but the cable car, which they're inside of, is in need of repairs. Jill completes the repairs and informs Carlos that during her quest to do so, she encountered Nikolai, but soon after was ambushed by zombies and presumes Nikolai to be dead, with no trace of him at the site of the zombie ambush. As Jill, Carlos, and the injured Mikhail ride the cable car, Nemesis reappears, looking for Jill. Mikhail heroically tackles the Nemesis head-on before sacrificing himself with a grenade, the explosion throwing the Nemesis from the carriage, but unfortunately causes them to crash into the clock tower's courtyard. Jill and Carlos reunite after being briefly separated by the crash and activate the clock tower's bell, which helps to guide the rescue helicopter to their location. Believing themselves to be saved, they excitedly watch the arrival of the helicopter before it is destroyed by the Nemesis, who shoots it down with a rocket launcher. Jill stands her ground against the Nemesis, but he infects her with the T-virus before Jill seemingly manages to defeat it. Jill, as a result of the T-virus infection, collapses and is unresponsive. Taking her to safety within the clock tower, Carlos goes in search for a T-virus vaccine in a nearby hospital, owned and operated by Umbrella. While searching the hospital, he finds Nikolai, who is in fact alive, killing fellow UBCS operative Tyrell. Nikolai reveals himself to be a supervisor and turns his gun on Carlos, but before he can divulge any more, Tyrell, who is actually still alive, pulls a grenade pin in an attempt to kill Nikolai and save Carlos. The blast flings Nikolai through the window, and Carlos manages to survive and successfully escape the blast. Now, I just want to quickly cut in here. That scene where Nikolai is flung through the window is nothing short of pure comedy.
It's brilliant,
The fucking speed he gets flung out of that window is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, proper flings through with arms and legs. But
it's the speed as well. You just sort of see Carlos do this little sort of jump and roll, and then you just see Nikolai, the speed that he picks up because he's running, and then it just goes.
Yeah, it's like he's been yanked through the window from the outside. Yeah.
It is. Honestly, I absolutely pissed myself at that. I was like the sheer force, absolutely fantastic. Anyway, acquiring the cure, he returns to the clock tower and administers the cure to Jill, saving her. Regaining consciousness 3 days later, which is crazy. You can't believe that there's actually such a long gap.
No.
It all seems very seamless.
It does, yeah.
But you don't realise that actually in game 3 days have passed. What the fuck was what the fuck was Carlos doing all that time? In fact, what was everyone doing in all that time?
Yeah.
Why is Nikolai still there? It's just, I think that's kind of something they really overlooked. So anyway, it's now the morning of October the 1st, 1998, and Jill continues her search for an escape towards Raccoon Park. Reaching the park caretaker's cabin, and also running into Nikolai, he goes on to explain to Jill that it is his job as a supervisor to gather combat data on Umbrella's bioweapons. Nikolai then retreats when they are interrupted by a seismic activity shaking the ground. Jill, in pursuit, is confronted by the Gravedigger, a massive worm-like creature. Jill manages to defeat it and presses on by using tunnels created by the Gravedigger worm, and Jill eventually reaches an abandoned Umbrella factory on the outskirts of Raccoon City, where inside she meets up with Carlos. Carlos tells her that the US government is planning to launch an experimental thermobaric missile which will hit Raccoon City at sunrise in an attempt to contain the spread of the T-virus. Jill continues to explore the factory in an attempt to either find a way out of Raccoon City or call for evacuation. After confronting the Nemesis once again, Jill learns the missile which will destroy Raccoon City has already been launched, and Jill and Carlos are running out of time to escape. Now, as you'd expect with a Resident Evil game, there are a couple of different endings to unlock, but we're going to continue with the canon storyline, and we'll cover the numerous optional paths you can take through the game, and which of that will affect the game's ending. But, for now, Nikolai hijacks Jill's intended escape helicopter, and Jill opens fire on it, destroying it and presumably killing Nikolai once and for all. Jill overhears a voice of an evacuation helicopter pilot on the radio, but is unable to make out due to interference. With nothing else other than just to simply try, Jill intends to meet Carlos at the helipad and hopes the helicopter will in fact arrive in time. Making her way to the rear of the factory, Jill encounters Nemesis one final time, who was transformed into a grotesque monster no longer resembling anything human, and after an intense battle against the clock as the missile approaches even closer, Jill defeats Nemesis using a large prototype railgun, and with the help of a Colt Python, where she gets to say the immortal line, "Stars, I'll give you stars." With the Nemesis defeated, Jill meets up with Carlos, and the pair successfully escape the city via a helicopter, which is piloted by none other than the lovable fool, Stars Alpha Team's weapons specialist, Barry Burton.
Good old Bazza.
Bazza! So the missile arrives, and Jill, Carlos, and Barry narrowly avoid the explosion as Raccoon City is completely vaporized. Jill swears to continue her pursuit of Umbrella and to bring them to justice, while the game ends with a news report which briefly details the destruction of Raccoon City and offers condolences for the lost lives and the terrible tragedy. So that's the canon story. It's relatively simple, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, there's obviously quite a bit there. But how was this told through the gaming mechanics? Well, before we move on to the main core gameplay mechanics of RE3, let's just stick with the story elements and the standout mechanics of the game. So, the previously mentioned live selection system that we was talking about earlier. At certain moments, the game hits you with a timed choice. Do you run, fight, hide, or take a wild gamble? These decisions can change enemy placement, trigger unique cutscenes, and alter how certain scenarios unfold. Interestingly, this system never returned in future Resident Evil titles, and RE3 is still the only game with this choose-your-own panic adventure style. So, here's a breakdown of the major live selection moments throughout the game and how each one plays out. So, in the Uptown RPD area, Jill reaches the front door of the police station, and that's where Brad gets killed by the Nemesis. And the first decision is either fight the Nemesis or run into the police station. Now, if you choose to stand your ground, you can actually beat Nemesis here. On hard mode, he'll drop the first of the special items, which we'll come to shortly. But you can also get Brad's Stars ID, and that can be taken immediately for early access to the computer in the lobby. So it sort of cuts out a little sort of fetch quest type thing. Running inside avoids the fight, but you'll have to look at Jill's own Stars ID deeper in the building to progress. But you don't. It's not really that bad, really. But ultimately, if you take too long to select either decision, you basically have to fight the Nemesis, and you just get punched in the face, I think. So the next one is in downtown, where you're inside the restaurant. If Jill investigates the restaurant before heading to the Raccoon Press building, the Nemesis bursts in again, forcing another quick choice: either escape to the basement or hide in the kitchen. Running into the basement, it causes the pipes to rupture, flooding the hallway, and you can crawl out through a vent, but Nemesis continues stalking Jill through the surrounding areas. This route also shifts later character encounters, where Jill will meet Carlos at the sales office and Nikolai at the gas station instead. Hiding in the kitchen leads to Jill smashing an oil lamp over Nemesis, briefly knocking him out, and it buys time for escape, and on hard mode he drops another item. This path also locks Carlos in at the gas station and Nikolai at the sales office instead. But if you fail to choose either, Jill and Carlos are forced to fight the Nemesis immediately, and the game ends if either character dies. So, in the Raccoon Press, this scene triggers if Jill visits the press building before the restaurant. The choices are rather similar, really. Jump out the window or hide in the back room. Hiding in the back room triggers an explosion that stuns Nemesis. It's an easy way to snag an item from him. Again, you won't get that on hard mode though. And jumping out the window skips the fight entirely and lets Jill explore a back alley packed with 2 helpful red herbs, which red herbs are so fucking rare. And this choice flips the later encounters, with Carlos appearing at the sales office and Nikolai at the gas station. If you don't choose either, then you're forced to fight. The substation. Once Jill grabs the fuse or the Magnum/grenade launcher, zombies begin busting through a fence, and the live action selection here is either head for the emergency exit or boost the power output. Running to the exit brings Nemesis into the scene, but only if Jill hasn't already grabbed the oil additive from the sales office. He'll waste 2 rockets killing zombie enemies, which actually makes the upcoming battle a little easier. Boosting the power output electrocutes the zombies instantly, but overloads the substation's delicate machinery, slightly altering the puzzle inside. The Nemesis won't appear regardless of earlier actions, and if you ignore the choice, you're stuck killing the zombies manually and possibly dealing with Nemesis afterwards as well. Can you remember your choices all?
Yeah.
Can you?
I remember what I did in all these. Of those ones, I ran straight into the RPD. I chose to hide in the kitchen in the restaurant because I did the restaurant first.
Nice, same.
Yeah. What was the next one after that?
Depends on your path, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I did that.
And then it's the Raccoon Press. But
yeah. So I
but-
didn't do that. The substation one, I electrified the zombies.
Yeah, I did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, boost the power output.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you've got the garage earthquake on the way back to the cable car. The ground shakes and Jill nearly falls into a huge pit as crates begin sliding toward her. You get two options. You can either climb up or jump down. Both routes do keep Jill alive, and jumping down leads through a cramped underground passage filled with sliding worms before looping back to the street. And if you hesitate for too long, Jill gets waltzed by the crates and drops into the tunnel anyway.
I think I hesitated.
Did you? I don't know what to do. I think I climbed up, I think.
I got knocked into the sewer by the box.
Yeah. The cable car. So after Mikhail's sacrifice, the cable car spins out of control and Jill has to make a split-second decision. Either jump out the window or hit the emergency brake. Jumping leads to Jill in the clock tower via a back entrance, and Carlos later hands over freeze rounds for the grenade launcher, and Nemesis will use his rocket launcher in the upcoming boss fight. Using the brake sends Jill crashing into the front courtyard instead. Carlos doesn't hand over the ammo, but he does destroy Nemesis' rocket launcher at the start of the fight.
I jumped out the window.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Hit the emergency brake. I also think if you hit the emergency brake, it leads you to being able to slap Carlos across the face for being a little bitch.
I am sad I missed that.
Yeah, that was fun. I actually should have used that as my thumbnail for the video because it looks great. They're in the middle of just like this heated conversation. You should just go right across his head. If you let the timer run down, the car simply crashes and it injures Jill, but the story continues as if she'd used the emergency brake.
Right.
The clock tower balcony, I'm really annoyed at this one. So, after completing the music box puzzle, Nemesis ambushes Jill on the balcony, and the choice is either use the lamp or use the electrical cord. Using the lamp blinds Nemesis, sending him tumbling off the balcony, but he won't drop any items. But if you use the electrical cord to electrocute him, it knocks him out long enough to grab a reward on hard mode. However, he'll resume stalking her soon after that. But if you fail to decide, Jill is forced to fight anyway or flee the encounter manually.
Yeah.
But I'm annoyed that I didn't use the electrical cord, because if I had, I would have been able to use the second item that you get from him to enhance my handgun.
Nice.
Because when you do that choice that we both did by hiding in the kitchen, he drops like a handgun part to me on hard mode. And I would have got the second part of that, so I was really fun.
Yeah, I used the floodlights on him as well.
Same.
Knocked him off the thing.
Yeah, went straight over. Yeah, I was really annoyed. Yeah. So the Raccoon Park Old River Bridge. The decision is this is a big one because it actually directly affects the ending. This is the main one that whatever you pick here, this is going to have the main. This is the main decision which will affect your ending. You can either push the Nemesis off or jump off the bridge. Pushing Nemesis sends Jill into the factory's upper levels where she meets Carlos. In this version, Nikolai is killed by the Nemesis, and Jill and Carlos escape together by helicopter before Raccoon City is hit by the missile. Jumping off is actually the right one.
Yeah.
So jumping off drops Jill into the sewers, where Carlos rescues her. This route results in Nikolai stealing the helicopter, and Jill and Carlos are instead rescued by Barry Burton. And as previously mentioned, this is considered the canonical ending. So, if you fail to respond, Nemesis just slams Jill off the bridge anyway, just get knocked off. But I think you always kind of think in those like moments, you should choose the option which is sort of quite confrontational.
Yeah.
But actually, the right option on that one is to simply jump off.
Yeah, you see, I pushed him off.
Did you?
So I got the non-canon ending where I didn't get Barry in my game.
I mean, that's just disappointing in itself, isn't it? Not seeing Baz. So The disused plant with Nikolai. This is only triggered if Jill fell or jumped from the bridge earlier. So Nikolai appears in a helicopter and opens fire on her. Your choices are either try to negotiate or return fire. Negotiating doesn't go anywhere. He refuses and then simply flies off.
Right.
So it doesn't actually do anything really. Firing back allows Jill to destroy the helicopter outright, killing Nikolai in the process. Alternatively, you can simply wait it out until he loses interest and leaves. So I was like, oh, fuck this. She's just fucking hiding and this is boring, so I'm going. Delay the choice and Nikolai fires a rocket at Jill, doing damage before the encounter proceeds anyway. But I think I had a rocket launcher. I think I'd found the rocket launcher in the locker and I was able just to shoot out the sky with that.
Oh, fair enough.
So the final battle with Nemesis. So even after defeating his monstrous final form, Nemesis remains still twitch and writhe as Jill attempts to escape. The last live action selection of the game is either finish him or ignore him and escape. Choosing to exterminate the monster triggers the immortal line, "You want stars? I'll give you stars." And she obliterates the Nemesis for good. But time keeps moving on. But if the missile strikes, is seconds away, the player can actually lose the game by choosing that option. So it depends how much time you've got. I mean, if you know you've got plenty of time to say a really cool, corny line, then you should take it. Leaving the room causes Nemesis to die off screen, either from its injuries or the missile. Failed to choose, and Nemesis spits one final glob of acid at Jill, poisoning her before dying himself. Just one final insult. So while we're talking about the ending of the game, let's talk a little more in depth about the different endings available. And when it comes to wrapping up Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, your final moments in Raccoon City depend heavily on live selection choices you've made, especially the two big ones. The bridge showdown with Nemesis and your confrontation with Nikolai when he's in his helicopter. So let's walk through the three distinct endings you can learn and what choices lead to them and why each one gives a slightly different farewell to Jill's desperate escape. So ending A, which is considered the quote-unquote good ending. This is the outcome you'll get if you play things bold on the river bridge. The key choice here is to push Nemesis off the bridge. By knocking him into the water, Jill bypasses the sewer route and enters the factory from the top floor. Inside, she eventually reunites with Carlos, and their final showdown with Nemesis plays out with a very different layout compared to the other endings. Meanwhile, and this is important, Nikolai doesn't get away with anything here. Instead of fleeing in a hijacked helicopter, he's taken out by Nemesis himself. It's a very poetic justice moment for a character who's been manipulating events from the shadows, from pretty much the start of the game. In the finale, Jill and Carlos escape the blast zone aboard a helicopter Carlos manages to secure. It's a clean, heroic exit. They escape together. Raccoon City is obliterated, and Nikolai pays the price for his betrayal. This is usually considered the good ending, and the one where everyone who deserves to survive does. Ending B, which is Barry's rescue. Now, this is the Nikolai survives version. So instead of shoving the Nemesis off the bridge, if you jump off yourself, the story diverges dramatically. Jill lands in the sewers, eventually making her way into the lower levels of the dead factory, where Carlos pulls her out of a nasty situation, and from here the next major choice involves Nikolai and his helicopter. So if you choose to negotiate with him, trying to talk him down instead of opening fire, Nikolai escapes with the first helicopter and he gets away scot-free. But here's the twist. Just when it seems like all is lost, a familiar voice crackles over the radio. Barry Burton sweeps in, piloting a second rescue helicopter, saving Jill and Carlos at the last possible moment. This ending gave us Barry's grand return, and it keeps Nikolai alive, slithering off to continue Umbrella's dirty work somewhere else. But the final ending, which is Barry's rescue / Nikolai dies, and this is the canonical ending. This version shares the same route as ending B, meaning you jump off the bridge, enter through the sewers, end up in the same factory scenario, but the turning point comes with the helicopter standoff. This time, instead of negotiating, you choose to fire on Nikolai's helicopter, destroying it outright. Nikolai's killed, and that just eliminates that lingering threat. Everything plays out exactly the same. Barry still arrives in the helicopter, rescues Jill and Carlos, but you've ensured Nikolai won't come back and cause any more trouble. And this one tends to be the least commonly seen, simply because the shooting the helicopter path is often missed by players. But yeah, if you've picked up that rocket launcher from the weapons cabinet, it's easy. You know,
Yeah.
it goes into first person, so it's an easy way to shoot him down. It's
Yeah.
not difficult. So
It's interesting that the least common ending is the cannon one.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is, isn't it? That's it. And I think it's all because of that choice to fight a helicopter. You know, most
Yeah.
people will probably think, well, how the fuck am I supposed to do that with a handgun? Or, you know, and I think most people will probably choose to try and negotiate with him or something like that. But yeah, apparently it's actually seen to be the most like uncommon. It's the cannon one. Yeah. So how your choices shape the endings? Well, so to put it simply, the bridge decision is seen to be the big one, and then ultimately, you know, following up from that is the Nikolai decision. So to get those important endings, they're the main choices. You've got to jump off the bridge leading to that decision with Nikolai, and that will secure your ending. So, although we usually discuss unlockables in their own section of typewriter sessions, I do want to quickly touch on some unlockables which are imperative not just to the storyline of Resident Evil 3, but to the future of the franchise. After you've finished the game once, Capcom gives players one last treat: the epilogue files. So there's 8 in total for lore fans. They're a goldmine, teasing some story beats that won't pay off until years later. But here's the kicker: you've got to play the game 8 times to collect all 8 epilogues. That's Capcom's polite way of saying, we hope you like replaying this game a lot and getting your money out of it. So, but the payoff's worth it because these files act like little cinematic postcards from the survivors of the first 3 Resident Evil games. Each one shows what each major character was doing after the destruction of Raccoon City. Essentially, mini sequels hidden in text. The cast roll call goes like this: you get 8 epilogues of Jill, Chris, Barry, Leon, Claire, Sherry, Ada, and Hunk. And there are 8 very different perspectives, some hopeful, some mysterious, and some downright ominous. So, fun facts. Here's where things really get interesting for long-time fans. Not every major character got one, so as we've just read out, there's some there that weirdly didn't get one. So Rebecca Chambers being one of them, Carlos Oliveira, he didn't get one, and they both play important roles in the series. But yeah, neither of them got epilogue files. Barry Burton, who, you know, it was never a playable character, and he only appeared in the first game, he did get one.
Yeah.
But I suppose he was a fan favourite as well. So, and actually, it's one of the most pivotal of the epilogue files as well. The file mentions Barry's daughters, including Moira, who later becomes a full-on protagonist in Resident Evil Revelations 2. And his other daughter, Polly, appears in flashbacks. So Barry's epilogue wasn't just a teaser, it's like a major setup for a story piece later down the road. So clearly they put something there that, if they ever needed to, they could, and they decided to. So that's pretty cool. Leon's epilogue is pretty much a big deal as well. It doesn't just hint at his future, it connects directly to the early scrapped version of Resident Evil 4, and later that epilogue was recreated almost shot for shot in the Dark Side Chronicles, so it's basically required viewing for Resident Evil lore nerds. Yeah, so that's worth looking into. Claire's epilogue changed the franchise, literally. Her epilogue references the end of Resident Evil 2, that she's determined to find Chris, and Leon mentions wanting to take down Umbrella. So director Hideki Kamiya later revealed that he added that line in on his own, and it ended up reshaping the next game. And because of it, writer Noboru Sugimura swapped Jill out and made Claire the lead of Code Veronica. So, Sherry's epilogue is a direct setup for Resident Evil 6. It gives us a glimpse of her situation under government supervision, bridging the gap between the Raccoon City incident and her return many years later. So, the epilogue files aren't just collectibles, they're like connective tissue, and each one pushed the Resident Evil universe forward at a time when story continuity was still forming. In some cases, these little text cards predicted plot lines that wouldn't appear on screen for more than a decade. So they're short, they're stylish, and they're still one of the coolest rewards for multiple playthroughs in any classic survival horror game. And these can be easily found online to have a read through, and I strongly suggest you do so, but it's certainly they're easy enough to find, and it's certainly a lot easier to find them online than it is to complete a game 8 fucking times. So I'd get yourself online and go and have a read.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time for that. But yeah, I'd go check it out. So, in terms of the regular gameplay mechanics, RE3 naturally had all the hallmarks of what made Resident Evil Resident Evil. These meant tank controls, limited ammo, item management, pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed camera angles, intense exploration and backtracking, which at this point of typewriter sessions, and if you're a Resident Evil fan anywhere, I don't need to go into these anymore.
Yeah.
So, but at this point, as we've mentioned a few times now, it leaned more into an action-oriented theme, and it added more frequent enemy encounters, quicker pacing, and additional player moves. Notably, it introduced the 180-degree turn and dodge evasion mechanic to avoid attacks. The dodge was exceptionally difficult to do, as we mentioned earlier, and I really, really do believe that a lot of it was luck. And I've mentioned this earlier when we was talking about it. I've mentioned it when I was trying to perfect it during my playthrough of it on my YouTube channel. I kind of felt like I was getting the hang of it, and then the next minute I'd get eaten.
Yeah, I just making the dodge button the same button that you have to hold to like raise your weapon. Baffling.
Yeah, they needed some. Yeah, they need. I think they just needed to think about how on earth to like. Because it wasn't just the button, it was the timing as well. It was the window is so specific, and I don't just mean like you know, it's this flash moment. It's barely even that. It is, of all the games I've played, it's probably one of the most finicky in terms of its timing. And yeah, it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. I would suggest that 90% of the times I successfully dodged whilst playing through this game was a complete accident.
Yeah.
Because I was like desperately trying to fire my weapon and I just
ended up
happened to dodge.
Yeah. Total fluke.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. I was exactly the same. I think it's very difficult to master. And for those that have, congratulations. So here's a fan favourite feature added to Resident Evil 3, which was ammunition crafting. At the start of the game, Jill has this in her inventory as standard, regardless of difficulty. And throughout the game, you'll find various types of gunpowder, A and B. And if you combine these together in your item management screen, it created gunpowder C. So you combine these different powders with a reloading tool and you create everything from handgun bullets to freeze rounds for the grenade launcher. And if you create the same type of ammo often enough, the game eventually lets you make more powerful versions. It's a surprisingly deep system and it adds a great extra layer of strategy. And in my playthrough on YouTube channel, I was able to make the enhanced handgun bullets and shotgun shells, and these are sick. They're so cool. Each round of the handgun will now stagger a zombie back, and of course it does additional damage. And the shotgun is now also more effective. So we're just going to cover like the differences in the ammunition and how to create that ammunition. So here are the various combinations for the gunpowder and what they'll create. So I'm just going to quickly run through these, and hopefully reading it out will make sense, because reading it makes sense. It might not sound like it makes sense when I'm just reading out letters. I might sound a little bit like Rain Man. So here we go. So basic gunpowder combinations using the reloading tool. So combining gunpowder A with another A will create handgun bullets and just more of them. So it creates a greater quantity of handgun bullets. And doing the same with gunpowder B just creates more shotgun shells. So B plus B equals BB, which creates more shells. A plus A creates AA, which creates more bullets. Simple.
Yeah.
That's nice and easy. Now, if you mix A and B together, it creates gunpowder C. And adding those into the reloading tool creates grenade rounds for the grenade launcher. And if you create 2 lots of C and combine those together, it gives you CC, which just creates more grenade rounds. And if you mix C and C and C, what do you think that makes?
Even more grenade rounds?
Incorrect, although I can see why you would think that. It actually creates magnum rounds.
Oh, does it really?
It does, yeah. So, but I can understand immediately why you would think that it would create grenade rounds.
Yeah.
But no, it creates magnum rounds. So if you mix A and B together to create C, and then you do that 3 times, and then mix all 3 grenades, mix all 3 gunpowder Cs together, you will create magnum rounds. Now, you can also create special grenade rounds with it as well, this is nuts. I didn't actually know you could do some of these. You can mix A and a C together to create flame rounds.
Oh, I figured that much out.
Yeah. You can mix a B and a C together to create acid rounds.
Oh, I never managed that.
And you can mix a C and a C together to create freeze rounds. How does that work though? Because a C and a C together just creates more grenade rounds. I shall have to have a look into that. Let me have a look. Well, we'll do this live. Let me have a look. So, how to create freeze rounds in RE3 Nemesis. Create freeze rounds by compounding gunpowder C. By mixing 2 gunpowder Cs together. Okay, so combining gunpowder C with the grenade rounds. So if you actually mix the powder into the grenade rounds itself,
right,
that will create freeze rounds. Okay. A highly efficient method is combining 3 gunpowder Cs, which with regular grenade rounds to create a large amount of ammunition. Right.
Okay. So
you actually have to add the powder, make the grenade rounds. Yeah, that's right.
And then add the powder to them.
Into the. Got yeah.
Okay.
So that makes sense. Okay. Another new introduction was the environmental interaction. This wasn't necessarily new, but they gave it a boost. So you can now shoot explosive barrels, like classic red oil drums, and explosive cartridges mounted on walls to take out groups of zombies in one satisfying boom. And it's especially handy when Nemesis is on your tail and you need a quick breather. So other areas where environmental interactivity was used was the valve handles in the Umbrella Pharmacy. Timing was really satisfying, so the steam would blast the horde of zombies, which breaks into the lab coming after Jill. Another area was the construction type area that you pass through, because you can see some like pallets suspended up in the air.
Yes.
Bit of a health and safety issue, but you know it was the late 90s. Things aren't like they are now. These can be shot down to land on a passing enemy, usually the drain demos are in the area, but it was tough to time this, because trying to get some sort of depth perception of where that pallet is and where it will land, even though it does have a shadow on the floor, trying to place yourself in an area where you know you can look up, shoot it, and it'll hit it. It was all quite difficult to do, and I don't think I ever really timed that properly. This one is an interesting one. So in the graveyard where the gravedigger attacks, at a point in the battle, the lampposts will become loose and they'll sort of like move a little bit, and that's your signal that you can shoot the lampposts into the puddle of water, and the gravedigger will pass through it and kill it straight away.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah,
I wish I had.
well, to be fair though, it's a difficult one, because you can do that, and it kind of feels like it'll save you some ammo, but then at the same time, you end up taking a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Because you're just running around waiting for that moment. So you end up either burning through your health items or burning through ammo. So it's a bit of a difficult one to decide which one's the best way to do it. But before this, in the Raccoon Park, something that I didn't realise until a lot of years later was that the oil lamps, so like the lampposts, if you will, they are like oil lamps, and they're dotted around the park. These can be shot down and the flames will drop into the area and kill enemies in the area.
My lord.
Yeah, so as you enter the Raccoon Park for the first time, it's like a big sort of courtyard garden type area, and there's like lampposts. Yeah, you can shoot those lights out.
Well.
Crazy.
Very, very smart, but clearly not as well signposted as...
No, that's it. I don't really think they made it clear. You know, they didn't... I don't know how they would have... I don't know, even if maybe just like Carlos was on and he just shot one of them out there to, to demonstrate. that would have been a nice little, oh, well, if he can do that, I can do that. Because that was often a mechanic used in games, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, and finally, Resident Evil 3 introduced a bit of randomization. So item locations, enemy placements, and even some weapons can shift between playthroughs. This can vary from ammunition and gunpowder being in different locations. And an example of the enemy placement being different is in Raccoon Park again. So sometimes you'll go in there and it'll be full of zombies, but then other times you'll have hunters to deal with. And that's obviously a great time to use the oil lamp destructible environment, as it can really help to get rid of these annoyances. Some of the lamps can also be found on the streets of Raccoon City itself, but I don't think it's entirely obvious which ones you can shoot and which ones you can't, and you can end up fucking shooting stuff for no reason and wasting bullets. So, but at the end of the day, when you combine that with the live action choices, and no two runs really feel the same, which is amazing, because it kind of feels like a short game, but it's not a short game at the same time. But it does kind of give you that feeling of reward to replay it over and over again, which is good if you want all 8 of those fucking epilogue files. But there's also other reasons to replay and other unlockables, but that is where we're going to end today's episode, and we're going to pick back up in the next episode covering all the other unlockables and its release and all the other exciting stuff, such as weapons, that go into detail about the different enemies introduced into Resident Evil 3. So yeah, we've got a lot to cover in the next episode as well. And of course, one of the big ones we'll be talking about is the Mercenaries mode.
Indeed. Yes.
Yeah, which obviously paved a way for entries. I mean, the Mercenaries ended up even with its own game on
it became a sort of long-standing staple of the series after that. So
I think it's been in nearly every release since. I think it was even made its way into Resident Evil Village.
It did.
So yeah, it's a big one. It's a big one, and it all started. Although I suppose really we'll talk about it properly, but the Mercenaries mode as it is introduced in RE3 is very different to the Mercenaries mode we end up playing in future installments. But this is where it started. So yeah.
Cool beans.
But this is where we'll leave it for today, and we'll pick up next time. And I think by the time the next episode goes out, Requiem will probably be out.
So yeah.
So excited. But for the time being, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And you don't forget to follow us on Instagram, which is @TypewriterSessions. Very, very easy. But that's a good way of just keeping on top of what our episode schedule is like. And if you want to keep an eye on, maybe there's been a bit of a break between episodes, we do keep people posted. We're obviously very busy people. This isn't our full-time job. We do have our busy professional lives and semi-professional lives to contend with. So we try and do this as often as we possibly can. And but yeah, the best way to keep an eye on upcoming episodes and our episode schedule is just to follow us on Instagram. And obviously you can contact us on there if you want to, if you've got anything you'd like us to cover, etc., etc.
Please do.
And in the meantime, is there anything you'd like to add, James?
I don't think so. I think I'm looking forward to part 2 of this, and then I will disappear until I've finished playing Requiem.
Yeah, that's it.
However long that takes, and then I'm sure at some point we will have a nice, healthy discussion about that. I don't think we're going to wait until we get there chronologically. I think we'll have to have some sort of chat about Resi 9 in real time.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll meet up because I teased something that I wanted us to do a while ago, didn't I, on our Instagram, where we talked about Field Report, Typewriter Sessions Field Report, and that is going to be our sort of like platform where we just do little short episodes, just talking about any Resident Evil news that's been floating around, just have little discussions here and there. And I would like our first episode of Field Report to land very soon, where we're just going to summarise all the exciting things to do with Requiem as we begin that final road to Requiem in February.
Indeed.
So we'll probably get that out to you in the next week or two. So keep an eye out for that as well. And again, you can keep an eye out for that on our Instagram. So yes. So if that's the case, then we'll say toodle pip. So say goodbye, James.
Goodbye, James.
Nicely done. I like that. And I'll say goodbye as well. So goodbye, everybody. And don't forget, keep those ink ribbons stocked. And we'll see you for another episode of Typewriter Sessions real soon. Goodbye, everybody. Nice.